September 25, 1066. 11 o'clock in the morning on the east bank of the River Derwent, at a place called Stamford Bridge, and an English soldier named Godric stands at the front of King Harold's army, staring across a narrow wooden bridge at a single Viking warrior who shouldn't be alive, who should have run when he saw 5,000 English soldiers coming over the hill, who should have died 10 minutes ago, when the first wave tried to cross and left 6 men bleeding on the bridge planks. Instead, this massive bearded giant stands alone in the center of the bridge with an axe in each hand and bodies piled around his feet like cordwood, and Godric can see the madness in the Viking's eyes even from 30 feet away, can see the foam at the corners of his mouth and the way he sways slightly, like he's drunk or possessed, or both, and Godric knows with absolute certainty that he's looking at a berserker, one of Odin's chosen warriors who feel no pain and fear no death. In the next 40 minutes, this one man will kill more than 40 English soldiers and change the course of history in ways that neither army can possibly imagine, because every minute this Viking holds the bridge is another minute that King Harold's exhausted army isn't crossing the river, and every minute they're not crossing is another minute closer to the moment, 3 weeks from now, when Harold will die with an arrow in his eye at Hastings because his army was too tired from this battle to properly defend England against William the Conqueror. The bridge is barely wide enough for 3 men to stand shoulder to shoulder. Old oak timbers dark with age and river water, and it spans the Derwent at its narrowest point, about 40 feet across. And the Viking has positioned himself perfectly in the dead center, where the bridge is strongest, and where attackers can only come at him from one direction in a narrow column that makes numbers meaningless. He's naked from the waist up, despite the autumn chill. His chest covered in scars and Norse tattoos, and fresh blood from wounds he doesn't seem to notice, wearing only leather trousers and boots, and a wild grin that shows missing teeth. And in his hands, he holds 2 Danish axes with blades so sharp they catch the morning sunlight like mirrors. And he's laughing, actually laughing, bellowing insults in Norse that the English soldiers can't understand but whose meaning is perfectly clear. The English soldiers behind Godric are shouting and cursing and demanding to know why the army has stopped. 5,000 men backed up along the road from York because one Viking won't move, and the officers are furious and embarrassed because they outnumber the entire Norwegian army 10 to 1, and they've caught the Vikings completely by surprise, caught them feasting and celebrating on the far side of the river with their armor piled in their ships 2 miles away. This should be an easy slaughter, a total victory, the kind of battle that bards sing about for generations. But they can't cross this bridge because one insane warrior has decided today is the day he dies, and he's taking as many Englishmen with him as he possibly can. And the longer he holds that bridge, the more impossible it seems that any single man could do what he's doing. King Harold Godwinson himself rides forward on his warhorse to see what's causing the delay. And he's already in a foul mood, because 3 weeks ago, he was in the south preparing to fight William of Normandy, who's been threatening invasion all summer. And then news came that Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, and the most feared warrior in Christendom, had invaded the north with 300 ships and an army of 10,000 Vikings, and had already defeated the northern English earls at the Battle of Fulford. Harold had to march his army to 110 miles from London to York in just 4 days, a pace that should have been impossible, that left his men exhausted and blistered and gasping for breath. But he'd done it because he understood that speed was everything, that if he could catch the Vikings while they were scattered and celebrating their victory, he could destroy them before they had time to organize their defense. And his gamble had worked perfectly. His scouts had found the Norwegian army split in 2 with half the men camped at Stamford Bridge on the east side of the Derwent, and the other half 8 miles away at their ships at and they were feasting and drinking and celebrating their victory over the northern earls, most of them without armor because the day was warm and they thought they were safe, and Harold's army had come down on them like a hammer on an anvil. The Vikings on the west bank of the river had been slaughtered quickly, caught completely unprepared, cut down while they fumbled for weapons or tried to run. And now the survivors have fled across the bridge to join the main Norwegian army on the east bank. And that army is forming up for battle, but they're panicking and disorganized and still without most of their armor. and if Harold can get his army across this bridge in the next 10 minutes, he can finish them before they're ready to fight properly. But he can't get across the bridge because of one man, one Viking berserker, who's holding the entire English army at bay. And Harold rides up to the riverbank and sees the bodies sprawled across the bridge planks, and sees the giant warrior standing there covered in blood and swaying like a tree in a storm. And Harold is a veteran of 100 battles. He's fought Welshmen and rebels and Vikings all his life, but he's never seen anything quite like this. The berserker sees the king approaching, and he raises both axes above his head and roars something in Norse, a challenge or a prayer, or maybe just pure rage given voice, and the sound of it makes horses shy and men step backward involuntarily. And Harold realizes that he's going to lose dozens of men taking this bridge, valuable soldiers he'll need at Hastings. And he can't afford to waste them on one insane Viking, no matter how impressive his last stand might be. But to understand how this moment came to be, to understand why this one Viking warrior is making this suicidal stand while his army retreats behind him, you have to go back 3 weeks to a beach in Norway where Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, decided to invade England one final time before age made it impossible. Harald Hardrada was 60 years old in 1066. Ancient by Viking standards, a man who'd been fighting since he was 15, who'd served in the Varangian Guard in Constantinople, who'd fought in Sicily and Africa and Russia, who'd been a king for 20 years, and who'd earned the nickname Hardrada, which means hard ruler or stern counsel, depending on how you translate it. And he'd spent his entire life believing that England should belong to the Scandinavians, that the English were soft Christian farmers who'd stolen land that rightfully belonged to the warriors of the north. When he heard that Edward the Confessor, the English king, had died in January of 1066, without a clear heir, Hardrada saw his opportunity, because England was in chaos with multiple claimants fighting for the throne. Harold Godwinson had seized the crown, but William of Normandy also claimed it and was preparing an invasion from the south. And Hardrada thought he could take advantage of the confusion, sailed to England with an army, and claimed the throne by right of conquest, just like his ancestors had done 2 centuries before. He assembled a fleet of 300 long, the largest invasion force to sail from Norway in a generation, and he brought 10,000 warriors, including some of the most feared berserkers and veterans in Scandinavia. Men who'd been raiding and fighting all their lives, professional soldiers who saw war as their trade, and plunder as their payment. And in early September they sailed across the North Sea, and up the Humber River into the heart of northern England. The northern English earls, Mercar of Northumbria and Edwin of Mercia, tried to stop them at Fulford on September 20th, and the battle was a disaster for the English. The Vikings formed a shield wall that the English couldn't break, and then counterattacked and drove the English army into the marshes where hundreds of men drowned in their armor trying to escape. And York, the great northern capital, surrendered without a fight, and agreed to provide the Vikings with hostages and supplies. Hardrada moved his army to Stamford Bridge, a good position 8 miles east of York with fresh water and open fields, where his men could camp comfortably while they waited for York to send the promised hostages and supplies. And he divided his forces, leaving half his men to guard the ships at Rickle, while the other half came to Stamford Bridge. And on the morning of September 25th, his men were relaxing and celebrating their victory. Many of them had taken off their heavy mail armor because the day was warm and they thought they were safe. And then English scouts appeared on the western hills and reported an army approaching. Not the hostages they were expecting, but a massive military force. And the Vikings realized, with growing horror, that King Harold had somehow marched his army from London to York in 4 days and was about to attack them while they were divided and unprepared and scattered across both sides of the river. And Hardrada began screaming orders to form a shield wall, to send riders to Rickle to bring the other half of the army, to buy time however they could. The Vikings on the west bank tried to delay the English advance, but they were too few and too disorganized, and Harold's army smashed through them in minutes and pushed toward the bridge. And that's when the berserker made his decision. He would hold the bridge alone, would give his king and his army the time they needed to form up properly on the east bank, would die if necessary, but would die in such a way that the skalds would sing about it for 1,000 years. Nobody knows his name. The English chronicles don't record it, and the Norse sagas that mention him don't agree on his identity. Some say he was one of Hardrada's personal bodyguards. Others claim he was just a common warrior who saw what needed to be done and did it. But what every source agrees on is what happened next, the most incredible display of individual combat prowess in medieval history. The English send their first group forward. 6 men with shields and spears moving carefully across the bridge in a tight formation, and the berserker waits until they're halfway across before he moves, and then he explodes into motion with a speed that seems impossible for a man his size. And his axes are blurs of steel and blood and splintered wood, and in less than 30 seconds all 6 Englishmen are dead or dying, and the berserker is standing in the same spot, laughing and gesturing for more. Harold sends a larger group, 10 men this time, with shields locked together, in a wall. Professional soldiers who know how to fight as a unit, and they advance slowly and carefully, keeping their formation tight. And the berserker lets them come closer before attacking, and this time the fight lasts longer. The Englishmen are skilled and disciplined, and they work together to try to overwhelm him with numbers. But the bridge is too narrow for them to use their advantage properly. The berserker fights like something from Norse mythology. Like Thor himself descended to earth, his axes moving in patterns that seem impossible, blocking spears with one axe, while striking with the other, spinning and ducking, and somehow always staying balanced on the narrow bridge. And one by one, the English soldiers fall, some killed instantly by axe blows that split shields and helmets, others wounded and stumbling backward, only to fall off the bridge into the river where the current carries them away. When the second group is defeated, the English army falls silent, stunned by what they're witnessing, and Godric, who's been watching from the front, realizes that the berserker isn't just fighting, he's performing. Every kill is theatrical and deliberate. He's not just trying to hold the bridge, but to inspire fear and awe, to make the English think twice before trying again, to buy his army maximum time by making each attack as costly and terrifying as possible. King Harold offers a reward to anyone who can kill the berserker, land and silver, and a place in his personal guard. And dozens of men volunteer, because the reward is generous and because no warrior wants to be the coward who refused when his king asked. And they go forward in groups of 3 and 4 and 5, and the berserker kills them all, his technique getting better as he warms up, learning from each group he fights, adapting his tactics to exploit the bridge's narrow confines. Some of the English try to shoot him with arrows from the riverbank, but the range is too great, and the few arrows that reach him he either dodges or simply ignores when they hit, pulling them out of his flesh and laughing and throwing them back. And it becomes clear that he genuinely doesn't feel pain, that whatever berserker madness has taken hold of him has severed the connection between his body and his mind, that he'll keep fighting until he's literally cut to pieces. The battle on the east bank behind him is developing. Harald Hardrada has formed his army into a circular shield wall on high ground, the best defensive formation possible given his circumstances, and his men are shouting encouragement to the berserker, whose sacrifice is giving them the time they desperately need. And they can see the English army piling up on the west bank, 5,000 men unable to cross a 40-foot bridge because one warrior won't move. 30 minutes pass, and the body count on the bridge has reached 20 English dead, and Harold's officers are begging him to find another way across the river, to send men upstream or downstream to ford or swim. But Harold refuses, because those options would take too long, and would split his forces. And he knows that every minute he waits, the Norwegian reinforcements from Rikkel are getting closer. And if those fresh troops arrive before he's destroyed Hardrada's army, the battle could turn against him. And then an English soldier named Thurbrand has an idea. A dishonorable idea, but a practical one. And he volunteers to take a small boat and float under the bridge and attack the berserker from below. And Harold doesn't like it, because it's unheroic and unchivalrous, but he's a pragmatist, who understands that glory is less important than victory. So he agrees. Thurbrand takes a spear and climbs into a small fishing boat, and his friends push him out into the current, and the boat drifts toward the bridge while the berserker is engaged with another group of attackers. And Thurbrand floats under the bridge and looks up through the gaps between the planks and can see the berserker's boots moving above him as he fights, can see blood dripping through the cracks in the wood. He stands in the boat, trying to keep his balance, and drives his spear upward with all his strength through the gap in the planks. And the spear punches through the wood and into the berserker's groin and up into his belly. And the berserker staggers and looks down in surprise as if he can't quite understand what's happened. And he drops one axe and reaches down to pull the spear out, but his legs give way and he falls to his knees. The English soldiers on the bridge rush forward and hack at him with swords and axes. And even wounded and dying on his knees, he kills 2 more men before he finally falls forward onto the blood-soaked planks. And his last act is to reach out with one hand, as if trying to grab his fallen axe. As if even in death he's trying to continue the fight. And then he goes still, and the bridge finally falls silent. The English army crosses the bridge, stepping over his body, and the bodies of the 40-plus men he killed. And they pour onto the east bank, and crash into Harold Hardrada's shield wall. And the Battle of Stamford Bridge becomes a general melee, thousands of men hacking at each other in the autumn sunshine. And the Vikings fight with desperate courage, but they're outnumbered and exhausted, and most of them are unarmored. And slowly, inevitably, the English begin to win. Harold Hardrada himself is killed early in the battle, shot through the throat with an arrow, and his standard-bearer is cut down. And without their king, the Norwegian army begins to break. Men running for their lives toward the ships at Rickle, and the English pursue them and cut them down as they run. And the slaughter continues for miles along the road. And of the 10,000 Vikings who'd invaded England 3 weeks before, fewer than 1,000 survived to sail home to Norway. King Harold wins a complete and total victory, destroys the last great Viking invasion of England, ends the age of Viking conquest that had terrorized Europe for 3 centuries. But the battle costs him dearly in ways he can't yet understand. Because his army is exhausted and depleted, hundreds of his best warriors are dead or wounded, and in 3 days' time he'll receive news that William of Normandy has landed in the south with another invasion force, and he'll have to march his tired army 200 miles back to fight another battle on October 14, 1066. Just 19 days after Stamford Bridge, Harold and his exhausted army will face William at Hastings, and they'll fight all day in a battle that could have gone either way. But Harold's men are tired from marching and fighting. They've lost many of their best soldiers at Stamford Bridge, including dozens killed by a single berserker on a bridge. And at the end of the day, an arrow will strike Harold in the eye and kill him, and William will conquer England, and the entire future of the English-speaking world will change forever. And historians will argue, for the next 1,000 years, about what would have happened if Harold had been able to rest his army for a month before fighting William, if those men killed on the bridge at Stamford had been alive to fight at Hastings, if that one Viking berserker hadn't delayed the English army for 40 crucial minutes, that left them too tired to properly defend their kingdom 3 weeks later. The berserker's body was left on the bridge where it fell. And according to some accounts, the English gave him a proper burial with his axes, because even Harold's soldiers recognized that they'd witnessed something extraordinary, that this unnamed warrior had displayed a level of courage and martial skill that transcended the normal bounds of warfare and became something legendary. The Battle of Stamford Bridge is often forgotten in the shadow of Hastings, overshadowed by the Norman conquest and William becoming king, but it was equally important in its own way. It marked the end of the Viking Age, the last time a Scandinavian army tried to conquer England by force, and it demonstrated that even the most brilliant military achievement can be undone by timing and exhaustion and the ripple effects of a single day's fighting. The bridge at Stamford still exists, rebuilt many times over the centuries, but still in roughly the same location. And on September 25 each year, some history enthusiasts gather there to remember what happened on that autumn morning in 1066, to remember the thousands who died in the battle, and especially to remember one Viking whose name is lost to history but whose actions changed the course of civilization, because sometimes the smallest moments have the biggest consequences. Sometimes one man with 2 axes and unshakable courage can delay an army and change the fate of nations. And sometimes, the heroes we remember aren't the ones who won the great battles, but the ones who fought impossible odds and died trying, knowing that their sacrifice might mean something even if they'd never lived to see how the story ended. The Berserker of Stamford Bridge held that wooden bridge for 40 minutes against an army of 5,000, killed more than 40 men in single combat, gave his king and his army the time they needed to prepare for battle even though that battle would ultimately be lost, and died in such a way that even his enemies honored him. And 1100 years later, we still tell his story and wonder what kind of man could do what he did. What combination of courage and madness and loyalty would make someone take that stand? England would never be the same after 1066. The Norman conquest brought French language and culture and feudalism, changed English law and society and architecture in ways that still echo today, but it also marked the end of something. The end of the Viking Age and the end of Scandinavian influence on English culture. And that ending happened at Stamford Bridge, where a berserker made his last stand and helped close one chapter of history so another could begin. The wooden bridge is gone, and the river has shifted its course slightly, and the fields where 10,000 men fought are now peaceful farmland, but the story remains. The story of impossible courage and tactical brilliance, and the strange way that history turns on individual moments of decision. When one person decides, they'll stand when everyone else would run. They'll fight when everyone else would surrender. They'll die in such a way that people remember it forever. And in remembering, they keep alive something essential about what humans are capable of when they're pushed to the absolute limit and choose defiance over survival, honor over safety, legend over life.